So, how do we get started with auto layout? Well, first we're going to need a project. So, I've got Xcode open. We're going to create a new project. So you want to make sure we're on iOS application, single view application. Here we can call it whatever we want. Auto layout practice. Make sure you have an organization name and an identifier if you need one. Language won't matter because we're not going to be touching the code at all in this tutorial. And for devices, we want to make sure we're on universal. And if core data is checked, we can just uncheck it since we won't be using it. And then we'll hit next to create our project. All right. Now to make sure we have enough room to work with, I'm just going to go ahead and make this screen as big as I can. Could also use full screen, but I just like to have my menu up here as well. So the very first thing we're going to do is we're just going to click over here onto the main storyboard. And this brings up Interface Builder. Now, since we're only going to stay in this main storyboard for the rest of the tutorial, we don't really need to see this information over here anymore. So we can come over here and deselect this to hide or show the navigator, and we're going to hide it because we don't need it. We do want to keep this inspector open though, because we're going to be working with the information in these panels over here. And if Xcode is not already showing this other window over here, you can turn that on and off by clicking this little object down here, the hide document outline, but we want to show it. And what this does is gives us a nice folder view of the contents of our storyboard view. So right now we've got nothing on our view controller, but let's go ahead and run it just to make sure that our project was set up correctly. So to do that, there's several ways. You can come up here and press this play button. That will build and then run the current scheme. You can also go to Product and Run. Or you can see here there's a little hotkey which we'll be using for most of the rest of the tutorial. And we can just click on that. So it's going to build our project and then pop up the simulator. Wow, great. So it's a completely blank screen, which is exactly what you wanted. Now, if like me, you feel like this window looks a little big, that's true. This is often a matter of a difference in resolution between an iOS device and your computer screen. So right now it's at 100, but I usually will knock it down to about 50. There we go. Now we have a nice view that fits on the screen and feels like it has more of the right size that we're used to seeing. So we know it's working. Great. In order to stop it, we can just come up here back on Xcode and hit this stop button. So let's get started with actually using auto layout. But first we need something to use auto layout with. Notice on the third tab right here, we're showing the object library. So if you're on one of these tabs, go ahead and just click over to this third one so that you can also see the objects. And then what we want to do is we need to add something to our screen so that we have something to use auto layout on. And for this tutorial, we're just going to work with regular views. So if you use the search bar down here, you'll notice that it starts filtering objects out. But a lot of them have the word view in them, so we'll still have to scroll down a little bit. And what we want is this regular view right here. And if you click on it and hover for a bit, it'll pop up to confirm for you that you have a UI view. You also might be viewing it in a list format like this. So once we've got our view, just grab it and drag it onto the screen. You want to wait until you see that plus sign. Otherwise, if you drop it over here, it'll just fall back, assuming that you decided you didn't want it. But it's white on white, and that's pretty hard to see. So let's give it a color. So over here in the inspector, let's go to the attributes, and then down to background. And you can click on that to open up this color wheel. Now I've got some colors already saved down here, so I'm just going to pick red. But you can feel free to pick whatever color makes you happy. So once we've done that, let's also just go ahead and resize this a little bit. Make sure that it actually fits on our screen. There we go. Now let's run it again really quick just to make sure that we can see this new red view that we've added. And again, I'm going to use Command R. Super. All right, so we can already see something weird's going on. Over here in Storyboard, it looks close to centered. There's white space around it, but over here, it's falling off the page. So this is what we're going to take care of while using auto layout today. So we can stop this. We've seen that our red view is working. So the first thing we want to do is let's just see if we can get this a little bit more centered. Oh, and you'll notice that while you're dragging it around, you'll see these guidelines every now and then. So this one looks like we're centering it vertically. We've got a horizontally centered one. There's even some guideline marks on the left and right edges as well as the top and bottom. And those are just built in based on the average needs of a person designing for an iOS device, assuming that you want things to not be too close to the edges, making it hard for users to view your content. But in our case, let's go ahead and try and center it. All right, so we've got it centered that way. And then we'll just come over here. There we go. All right, so we've got it centered in this screen. So let's run it again and see if that fixed our problem. It still didn't. So maybe those guides don't have anything to do with what it looks like on a device. And that's basically true. Those guides are mostly just there for you while you're working in this view. Interface Builder is not a what you see is what you get kind of editor. Now, these are the kind of editors that most people are familiar with, such as working with Word or OpenOffice, where you're typing on a page, and if you were to print that page, it will look exactly how it looked on your screen. But here, as you see, this window that we're working inside of, this view controller, is square. Now, aside from the Apple Watch, which was just released, there's no iOS device that's actually square. So why is this one square? So the reason that it's square is because Apple wants to actively encourage developers to not think about one screen type when they're designing. If this was shaped like an iPhone, people would be influenced to create their design based on what it would look like specifically for an iPhone. And that means that when somebody uses their app on an iPad, it might look different or not quite the way that the developer and the designer intended. So it's really a way that Apple is encouraging developers and designers to abstract away from the very specific screen sizes and think instead about the relationships. And this is why we're using auto layout. So we want it to be centered on the page, and it looks centered on the page to us right now, but not in the simulator. There's a really easy way to add some constraints based on what it looks like on the screen right now. So let's go ahead and do that as our first step. So we're going to come down here, and there's 3 little menus. These first 2 have different kinds of constraints. These ones are related to alignment, and these are all the other constraints. This third option here, resolve auto layout issues. Okay, great. So we see it's in 2 sections, one for selected views and one for all views. So we've only got one selected view and only one view total, so it won't matter which one we choose. But for now, let's just go ahead and use the selected view, assuming you've clicked on it. And let's hit add missing constraints. All right, great. So something definitely happened here. We now have all of these blue lines on our screen. And let's see, we also have this new constraints over here. But before we take a look at those, let's go ahead and just run it and see what just happened. Okay, well that's not a square, but I can see now how it came to this conclusion about what we wanted. So it's not a square, but it looks like what it did do was it looked at the spacing between our object and the edges of the screen, and that's what it decided to preserve. So we've got this nice even spacing all around our object, and it doesn't look awful. It's not a square, but that's okay.